A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
You know, there is an old joke in diplomacy that a lie is just a temporary substitute for the truth, but in 2026, it feels like the lie has actually become the infrastructure itself. We are looking at a world where "I did not do it" is no longer just a defense. It is a primary offensive strategy. Today's prompt from Daniel is about the doctrine of plausible deniability, specifically how it has evolved from the old-school trenchcoat and dagger tradecraft of the Cold War into this foundational, automated pillar of modern algorithmic statecraft. It is a heavy one, and honestly, it feels like we are living through the end of proof as a concept in international relations. We have moved from using deniability as a shield to protect an asset to using it as a weaponized feature of every single geopolitical move.
It is a massive shift, Corn. I am Herman Poppleberry, and I have been looking at the data on this for the last few months. If you look at the landscape of global conflict right now, we have moved past the era where a nation-state wants to plant its flag on a victory. In fact, the most successful operations today are the ones where the victim knows who did it, the aggressor knows who did it, but the technical evidence is so muddied that no international body can actually point a finger without looking like they are making things up. We call this the attribution gap, and it is widening every single day. As of March 2026, over 60% of cyber intrusions against critical infrastructure are now classified as unattributed by major intelligence agencies. That is not a failure of intelligence, it is a success of design.
The attribution gap. That sounds like one of those terms that is designed to make something terrifying sound like a statistical error. But you are right. If you cannot prove it to a standard that triggers a kinetic response or a massive round of sanctions, then for all intents and purposes, it did not happen in the eyes of international law. Daniel's point about this being automated is what really gets me, though. It is not just a guy in a basement anymore. It is a fundamental change in how we define a state action. Is plausible deniability still just a tactic if it has become the default state of international relations?
That is the core question. In the 20th century, plausible deniability was a manual process. You had to hire a local militia or a group of mercenaries and hope they did not talk. You were building a legend, like we talked about back in episode 9084 regarding the paper trip paradox, where you manually fabricated a paper trail to give a human asset a history. But today you are not building a legend for a human, you are building a digital persona at scale. The automation is the key. You are using generative artificial intelligence to create thousands of fake actors, fake social media histories, fake technical footprints, and even fake internal leaked documents that point the finger at a different country entirely. We are moving from the human asset model to the autonomous proxy model.
It is like a hall of mirrors, where even the mirrors are fake. I was reading about the Ghost Grid incident from January of this year. For those who do not remember, we had those massive power failures across 3 major metropolitan hubs. It was a 4-hour blackout. Total chaos. Hospitals on generators, transit systems frozen, the works. And the official report eventually just called it unidentified software bugs. But everyone in the industry knew that was not just a bug. The code signatures had traces of 3 different state actors, but they were layered in a way that made it impossible to tell who was the primary and who was the decoy.
That Ghost Grid incident is the perfect case study for synthetic attribution. The attackers did not just hide their tracks, they intentionally left behind a trail of breadcrumbs that led to 4 different places. They used artificial intelligence to generate deepfake metadata. Imagine looking at a server log where the timestamps, the internet protocol addresses, and the specific keyboard layout signatures all suggest the attack came from a specific office in East Asia. But the actual logic of the code is written in a style that mimics a known hacker collective in Eastern Europe. They even use style transfer algorithms to make the code comments look like they were written by a native speaker of a third language. When you have that level of noise, forensic analysis becomes inconclusive by design.
And if it is inconclusive, the political will to retaliate just evaporates. You cannot go to the United Nations or start a trade war based on a maybe. It feels like the burden of proof has shifted entirely in favor of the aggressor. In the old days, you were innocent until proven guilty, but in modern statecraft, you are deniable until the forensic evidence is mathematically certain, which, as you keep telling me, is becoming an impossible standard to hit. The speed of obfuscation is now outpacing the speed of forensic verification.
It takes a team of top-tier analysts months to pick apart a sophisticated cyber intrusion, but an artificial intelligence agent can generate 1 million different obfuscation layers in a matter of seconds. By the time you have a solid lead, the geopolitical moment has passed. The news cycle has moved on. This has led to what people are calling proxy-as-a-service. Instead of state actors doing the work directly, they use decentralized infrastructure. They find non-state actors, sometimes just teenagers or small criminal groups, and they incentivize them through crypto assets. They use smart contracts that automatically pay out when a certain level of disruption is achieved. There is no paper trail, no bank transfers, and no direct command and control nodes that can be traced back to a government building.
It is the ultimate gig economy. Do a little light sabotage on a regional water treatment plant, get paid in an untraceable privacy coin, and the state that ordered the hit can honestly say they have no record of that person on their payroll. But Herman, how are they actually hiding the communication? If I am a state actor, and I am talking to 1,000 different hackers, surely someone can see that traffic.
That is where multi-hop obfuscation in decentralized infrastructure comes in. They are not using a single server. They are using compromised smart home devices, Internet of Things sensors, and even high-end refrigerators to route command and control traffic. When the source of an attack is literally 10,000 different smart toasters across 5 continents, the idea of tracing it back to a single source is laughable. It is not just a needle in a haystack. It is a needle that has been ground into dust and scattered across the entire planet. They are using decentralized physical infrastructure to mask the command nodes so that even the people carrying out the attack do not know who they are actually working for.
But Herman, doesn't this eventually break the whole idea of a rules-based order? If everyone knows everyone else is lying, and we all just agreed to pretend the lies are plausible, aren't we just waiting for the whole thing to collapse into open conflict? It feels like we are eroding the very foundation of international law because the law relies on evidence.
That is the massive risk. When deniability becomes a standard feature of every state action, the diplomatic off-ramps we used to rely on start to fail. Usually, if a country gets caught doing something, there is a period of negotiation. There are sanctions, there are apologies, there is a return to the status quo. But if no one admits to the action that caused the crisis, there is no one to negotiate with. We are moving into a post-negotiation world, which is exactly what we explored in episode 1202 when we looked at the decapitation doctrine.
Right, I remember that. The decapitation doctrine is the idea that you can neutralize a leadership's ability to respond by making the source of the threat invisible. Because if you cannot prove the chain of command, you cannot hold the leadership accountable. You cannot even do a surgical strike against the people responsible, because you cannot technically prove they are the ones responsible. It makes the leadership of these states essentially untouchable. They can sit in their offices and order these shadow strikes, knowing that the worst they will get is a strongly worded letter about unidentified actors.
And it is not just happening in the digital world. The maritime incidents in the South China Sea from a few months ago are another great example of this evolving tradecraft. We saw these accidents involving autonomous, unflagged vessels. These boats were not carrying any crew, they had no identifying markings, and they were basically just floating hazards that happened to drift into very sensitive shipping lanes at very convenient times. When they were recovered, the onboard computers had been wiped clean by a remote trigger. Who do you blame? You can guess, you can even be 99% sure, but that last 1% is where the plausible deniability lives. It is a gray zone that is getting larger every year.
It is funny you mention the gray zone, because it feels like the gray is becoming the only color on the map. I mean, look at how this applies to something like election interference or domestic disinformation. It is not just about blowing things up or hacking power grids. It is about the subtle erosion of trust. If a state actor can flood a rival nation with artificial intelligence-generated content that looks like it is coming from their own citizens, and they can do it through a series of multi-hop obfuscation points, they are essentially performing a soft coup without ever firing a shot. And again, they can just say, "Oh, that is just the internet being the internet. We have no control over what people post."
It is the democratization of deception. In the past, you needed a billion-dollar intelligence budget to create a deniable digital persona. Now, you just need a decent understanding of prompt engineering and a few $100s worth of compute time. We are seeing smaller nations and even large corporations using these same tactics to settle disputes. Why go through a multi-year legal battle over a patent when you can just have a deniable actor leak, a slightly flawed version of the rival's code, and ruin their reputation? It is a race to the bottom where the prize is being the last person left who can say, "I did not do it," with a straight face.
So if I am a business owner or a government official listening to this, and I realize that the old way of detecting the actor is basically dead, what do I actually do? It feels like we are being told that the police are never coming and the evidence will never hold up in court. That is a pretty bleak outlook for security. Is there really no hope for a technical solution? No kind of digital DNA or blockchain-based logging that could actually bring some truth back into the room?
People are trying. There are projects working on hardware-level attestation, where every piece of data has a cryptographic signature that can be traced back to the physical chip that created it. But the problem is that even those systems have vulnerabilities. And more importantly, the people who want to remain deniable will just refuse to use that hardware. As long as there is a way to generate unsigned, unverified data, that is where the statecraft will happen. You cannot force the entire world onto a transparent system when the most powerful players in the world benefit from the lack of transparency.
That is the catch-22. The people with the power to fix the system are the ones who are getting the most utility out of its brokenness. It reminds me of the old saying that you cannot wake someone who is pretending to be asleep. These states are not failing to identify the attackers because they are incompetent. They are failing because identifying the attacker would force them to take an action they do not want to take. Plausible deniability is as much a gift to the victim as it is to the aggressor. It gives the victim an excuse not to start a war they cannot afford.
That is a very incisive point, Korn. Sometimes the deniability is a mutual agreement. If a major power has their satellite disabled, and they know exactly who did it, but they also know that a retaliatory strike would lead to global nuclear war, they might actually prefer the plausible lie. They can say, "Oh, it was just space debris," and everyone goes home and lives to fight another day. In that sense, plausible deniability is actually a stabilizing force in a weird, dark way. It prevents the escalation that would come from absolute certainty. It is a safety valve for the 21st century.
So we are lying to each other to keep the world from blowing up. I am not sure if that makes me feel better or worse about the situation. It feels like we are building a civilization on a foundation of quicksand, but I guess as long as we all keep treading water, we stay afloat. But for the average person or the average company, what is the practical takeaway? We cannot just ignore the fact that our infrastructure is being poked and prodded by ghosts.
It requires a fundamental shift in how we think about defense. We have to move toward what I call zero trust attribution. You have to stop worrying about who is doing it and start focusing entirely on mitigating the impact. In the old world, you would try to find the hacker and get them arrested. In the 2026 world, you assume your infrastructure is already compromised by someone you will never identify, and you build your systems to be resilient to that reality. You do not look for the fingerprint, you look for the pattern of the impact. It is like moving from a criminal justice model to a public health model. You do not try to sue the virus, you just try to make sure the patient does not die.
That is a great analogy. You focus on the symptoms and the recovery rather than the culprit. But that feels like a surrender of sovereignty in a way. If a nation cannot protect its borders or its digital space because it cannot identify the intruder, does the concept of a nation-state even mean anything anymore? If sovereignty is the ability to exclude others from your territory, But your territory is now a digital and physical hybrid that is constantly being permeated by deniable actors. Then sovereignty is definitely becoming more of a polite fiction.
We are entering an era of permanent ambiguity. It is a state of low-level, constant conflict where no one is ever officially at war, but no one is ever really at peace either. It is the shadow strikes we discussed in episode 1276, but scaled up to every aspect of society. For our listeners, the takeaway here is that you need to be looking for these patterns in your own industry. If you see a major event that is being blamed on a random glitch or an unidentified group, do not just take that at face value. Look at who benefits from the ambiguity. Look at the timing. In the era of algorithmic statecraft, the most important information is often the stuff that is being intentionally obscured.
And do not wait for the official report to tell you what to do. By the time the report comes out, the actors have already moved on to the next target. Resilience is the only real defense left. We have to assume the world is going to stay messy, and that proof is going to stay expensive and rare. We have to get comfortable with the gray. The world of black and white, of clear winners and clear losers, is a 20th century relic. The future belongs to those who can operate effectively without ever needing to know for sure who is on the other side of the screen.
I think that is exactly right. It is a fascinating and terrifying evolution of a very old human instinct. The lie has just gotten a lot better at hiding, and it has got the processing power of 1,000 supercomputers behind it now.
Well, on that slightly unsettling note, I think we have covered the ground for today. It is a lot to chew on, but that is why we do this. If you are sitting there thinking that the world feels a little more confusing than it did 20 minutes ago, then we have done our job. We should probably wrap this up before we start questioning if we are even real or just some deniable artificial intelligence proxies ourselves. Thanks as always to our producer Hilbert Flumingtop for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes.
And a big thanks to Modal for providing the graphics processing unit credits that power this show. We literally could not do this without that kind of infrastructure. It is the backbone of our own little corner of the digital world.
This has been my Weird Prompts. If you're enjoying these deep dives into the weirder corners of our modern world, do us a favor and leave a quick review on your podcast app. It genuinely helps us reach more people who are interested in this kind of stuff.
You can also find us at myweirdprompts.com for the full archive and all the ways to subscribe. We are on Telegram too if you want to get notified the second a new episode drops.
All right, Herman, I think that is it. Let's get out of here before the grid goes down again.
Sounds like a plan. See you next time.
See ya. See ya.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the close from sloth, from man, from long-eared host. My Weird Prompts, until next time, stay curious, keep